She wasn't supposed to be there. Not on that road. Not at that hour. Not standing so still beneath a dying sky that bled orange into gray like something trying to hold on just a second longer. The highway stretched empty for miles, a quiet strip of asphalt cutting through scrubland and wind-bent grass, the kind of place where even sound felt like it had to ask permission to exist. Sergeant Ethan Cole slowed his truck almost without thinking, boots heavy on the brake, the engine rumbling low like it, too, sensed something off. He had driven this route a dozen times before. Same cracked mile markers, same rusted fence lines leaning into the horizon, but tonight felt different. Quieter, thinner, like the air had been pulled tight across something unseen. The woman stood just beyond the shoulder, maybe 10 feet from the edge of the road, hands folded loosely in front of her, posture straight but fragile, as if she had been placed there rather than walked there. Elderly, late 70s, maybe older. Pale skin that caught the last light in a way that made it hard to tell where shadow ended and she began. Her coat was a faded blue, too light for the chill that had crept in with the evening wind, and her silver hair rested neatly against her cheeks, unmoved by the breeze that brushed past Ethan's open window. That was the first thing he noticed. The wind moved everything else. Not her. He rolled the truck to a stop. Gravel crunched softly beneath the tires, the sound sharp in the silence. Beside him, Rex shifted. The German Shepherd had been lying calm in the passenger seat moments ago, head resting between his paws, eyes half closed in that quiet, watchful way trained dogs never fully let go. But now he was upright. Still, every muscle drawn tight under his sable coat, ears forward, eyes locked. Not on the road. On her. Ethan followed his gaze, squinting slightly. "You see something, buddy?" he murmured, more out of habit than concern. Rex didn't respond. He didn't blink. His chest rose slowly, deliberately, like he was measuring something deeper than scent. Ethan exhaled, pushing the door open. The evening air slipped in, cool and dry, carrying the faint smell of dust and distant rain. "Ma'am," he called, stepping out, his boots settling against the ground with a dull thud. "You all right out here?" The woman turned her head, just slightly. Not startled, not relieved, just aware. Her eyes met his, and for a brief second, Ethan felt it. That subtle shift, like stepping into a room where a conversation had already been happening before you arrived. "Oh," she said softly, voice gentle, almost too gentle, like it had traveled a long way to reach him. "I'm sorry to trouble you." She took a small step closer to the road, not quite into the light. "I seem to have lost my way." Ethan nodded, instinctively polite. "Happens out here. Not much for signs." He gestured vaguely behind him. "Where you headed?" But before she could answer, Rex growled. Low, controlled, not loud, but deep enough to be felt more than heard. It vibrated through the open door, through the seat, through Ethan's bones like a warning spoken in a language older than words. Ethan turned immediately. "Rex." The command was soft, firm, the kind that usually ended things before they began. But Rex didn't back down. He stepped forward, placing one paw against the edge of the seat, body leaning toward the open door, eyes never leaving the woman. The growl didn't rise. It deepened, focused, like he wasn't reacting, he was recognizing. Ethan frowned. That wasn't like him. Rex had seen crowded streets, loud stations, strangers in every shape and state. He didn't spook. He didn't misread. Not like this. Not ever. Ethan glanced back at the woman, offering a small apologetic smile. Sorry about him. He stopped. Because she hadn't moved any closer. And somehow, she hadn't moved at all. Same stance. Same distance. Same faint smile resting on her lips like it had been placed there and forgotten. "Your dog," she said quietly, her voice threading through the stillness. "He doesn't want me to leave, does he?" The words hung in the air. Not a question. Not quite a statement. Something in between. Rex barked. Sharp. Sudden. Not aggressive. Not fearful. Final. Ethan's heart kicked once in his chest, harder than it should have. "Rex, heel," he said, more firmly this time. The shepherd didn't move. Another bark. Then another. Each one spaced. Deliberate. Like he was answering something Ethan couldn't hear. The wind shifted again, brushing past Ethan's jacket, stirring the dry grass along the roadside. He felt the temperature drop just a few degrees. Enough to notice. Not enough to explain. He looked back at the woman, ready to steady the moment, to return things to something normal, something explainable. But for the first time, he hesitated. Because the light had changed. The sun had dipped just enough that shadows stretched longer across the ground, and hers didn't quite match. Ethan swallowed slowly, something tightening in his chest, not fear exactly, but awareness. The kind that comes just before you understand something you're not ready to understand. Rex barked again, louder now, urgent, not to scare her, not to warn Ethan, but to stop something from happening. And for the first time since he stepped out of the truck, Ethan didn't know which one it was. Before we begin, tell me where are witching from. Drop your country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story travels. Ethan did not move right away. The kind of training that had carried him through heat, dust, and long nights under unfamiliar skies told him to stay calm, to assess, to slow things down until they made sense again. But this did not feel like something that would make sense if he waited long enough. Rex's barking had shifted now, no longer sharp bursts, but spaced, controlled, almost deliberate, as if each sound was placed exactly where it needed to be. Not louder, not frantic, just insistent. Ethan stepped slightly to the side, placing himself between the open truck door and the woman without thinking about it. A small adjustment, barely noticeable, but instinctive all the same. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady, respectful, the way it always was when speaking to someone older. "Why do you not come a little closer to the road? It will be easier to point things out from here." The woman smiled again, that same soft, distant curve of her lips that did not quite reach her eyes. "I would," she said gently, "but I think your dog would not like that very much." Rex growled in response, low and immediate, as if he understood every word. Ethan glanced back at him, a flicker of irritation crossing his face, not at the dog, but at the situation slipping out of the neat, predictable lines he was used to. "Rex, sit," he said firmly. The German shepherd did not sit. He stepped down from the seat instead, landing silently on the ground beside the truck, positioning himself just ahead of Ethan, not touching him, but close enough that Ethan could feel the warmth of his body through the thin layer of evening air. His posture was different now, not defensive, not aggressive, anchored, like he had decided something and was not going to move from it. Ethan exhaled slowly, forcing a small, polite smile back onto his face as he turned toward the woman again. "Where are you headed, ma'am?" he asked. "There is a service road about a mile back, and another town about 12 miles east. If you tell me which one you are trying to reach, I can point you in the right direction." The woman tilted her head slightly, as if considering the question, but there was something strange in the way she did it, something delayed, like the motion came a fraction of a second after the thought. "I am looking for a road," she said at last, her voice softer now, almost thoughtful. "A road that leads somewhere I have not been in a very long time." Ethan nodded slowly, trying to place it, trying to translate her words into something practical. "You mean a town? A house? Do you have an address?" She shook her head. The movement was gentle, almost graceful, but again, the wind did not touch her hair. "No," she said, "not a place you can write down." Rex let out a short, sharp bark, cutting through the quiet like a line drawn across a page. Ethan felt it in his chest again, that tightening, that sense of being just a step behind something important. "Rex," he warned, more sharply this time, but the dog did not break his stance. Instead, he shifted his weight forward, one paw lifting slightly off the ground, his nose angled toward the woman as if testing the air between them. Then, slowly, he took a single step closer. The distance between them shortened by maybe a foot. The woman did not move back, but her smile faded just a little, not into fear, but into something else. Something like recognition. "He knows," she murmured, almost to herself. Ethan caught the words, his brow tightening. "Knows what?" he asked. The woman's eyes lifted to meet his again, and for the first time, there was something deeper there, something that did not belong to a simple roadside conversation. "Some roads are not meant to be taken twice," she said quietly. "And some travelers do not realize they have already reached the end." The wind shifted again, stronger this time, brushing against Ethan's jacket, tugging at the loose fabric of his sleeve, carrying with it a faint chill that settled into his skin. He rubbed his hands together once, more out of instinct than cold, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her. "Ma'am," he said more carefully now, choosing his words. Have you been out here long? She did not answer right away. Instead, her gaze drifted past him, toward the truck, toward Rex, who now stood perfectly still, his amber eyes fixed on her with an intensity that felt almost human. Then she spoke, long enough to forget when I arrived. Another bark. Louder. Closer. Rex moved again, this time stepping directly between Ethan and the woman, his body forming a clear line, a barrier that was impossible to ignore now. Ethan felt a flicker of frustration rise, but it was quickly swallowed by something else, something heavier, something that made him hesitate instead of react. Rex, that is enough, he said, but the command lacked the certainty it once had. Because now, standing there on that empty stretch of road, with the light fading and the air growing colder by the minute, Ethan was no longer sure his dog was the one making a mistake. The woman took a small step forward then, just enough to close the distance by another foot, and for the first time, Ethan noticed something he could not explain. The gravel beneath her feet did not shift. Not a sound, not a crunch, just stillness. Rex barked again, louder than before, a sharp, urgent sound that echoed down the empty highway and vanished into the distance. And this time, Ethan did not try to stop him. The sound of Rex's bark did not fade the way it should have. It carried farther, sharper, as if the empty road itself was holding on to it, stretching it thin across the distance before letting it go. Ethan felt it settle into his chest, not as noise, but as meaning, a warning that refused to soften. He stood there for a moment, boots planted on gravel that suddenly felt less solid beneath him, eyes locked on the woman as she took another step forward. Still no sound, no shift of stone, no sign that her weight touched the ground at all. Stop, Ethan said, the word coming out firmer than before, not loud, but certain. Not directed at Rex this time. At her. The woman paused. Just enough. Her head tilted again. That same slow, almost delayed motion, as if she were listening to something far away before deciding how to respond. You do not want me to come closer? She asked, her voice soft, but carrying something new beneath it now. Not confusion. Not offense. Something closer to curiosity. Ethan did not answer right away. His eyes dropped, just for a second, to the ground between them. The last stretch of sunlight had slipped lower behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the road, stretching everything thin and uneven. He found hers, and there it was again. Not missing, not gone, just wrong. The angle did not match the light. It fell in a direction that made no sense, cutting across the gravel like a memory that did not belong to the present moment. He lifted his gaze back to her slowly. Ma'am, he said, more carefully now, each word chosen, measured. I think it would be better if you stayed right where you are. Rex shifted slightly in front of him, his body tightening, ears forward, breath steady but deeper now, as if something invisible had drawn closer and he was bracing against it. The woman studied them both in silence. The faint smile returned, but it had changed. It was not as soft anymore, not as distant. There was something fragile in it now, something almost tired. Your dog, she said quietly. He is very certain. Rex let out another low sound, not quite a growl this time, not quite a bark, something in between, like a voice caught between two worlds. Ethan reached down without looking and rested his hand lightly against the back of Rex's neck, fingers brushing through the thick fur there. The contact grounded him, pulled him back just enough to think clearly. He usually is, Ethan said. He does not react like this without a reason. The woman's eyes softened at that. Not toward Ethan. Toward the dog. No, she whispered. He would not. The wind moved again, colder now, carrying with it a faint scent that Ethan could not quite place. Not dust. Not rain. Something older. Like wood that had been left out too long. Like something that had once belonged somewhere else. Rex's nose lifted slightly, drawing in the air, his body going even stiller than before. Then, without warning, he moved. Not forward. Not back. Down. He lowered his head and began to paw at the ground just a few feet ahead of where the woman stood, claws scraping softly against the gravel, pushing aside small stones with quick, deliberate motions. Ethan blinked, caught off guard. Rex, what are you doing? He muttered, but there was no command in it this time. Only confusion. Rex did not stop. He dug deeper, faster now, breath coming a little heavier, each movement precise, purposeful, as if he knew exactly where to dig and what he was looking for. The woman watched him, her expression shifting again, the faint smile fading completely now, replaced by something that looked dangerously close to recognition. "No," she said under her breath, barely audible. "Not there." Ethan heard it. He felt something tighten in his chest again. "Not where?" he asked, stepping slightly to the side, trying to see what Rex was uncovering. The gravel gave way more easily than it should have, as if it had been disturbed before, as if something had already been buried there once and never quite settled back into place. Rex's paw struck something solid. A dull, metallic sound beneath the scrape of stone. He froze for half a second, then leaned in, pushing the dirt aside with his nose, uncovering the edge of something dark, worn, half hidden beneath the surface. Ethan crouched slowly, his heartbeat steady but heavier now, each pulse more deliberate than the last. He reached out, brushing away the loose gravel with his fingers, revealing more of the object beneath. Metal, thin, rectangular, a chain, half buried, looped around itself like it had been forgotten. Rex stepped back just enough to give him space, but his eyes never left the spot. Ethan lifted the object carefully, dirt falling away in small clumps as it rose into the fading light. A dog tag, old, weathered, the edges worn smooth by time, the surface dulled, but not unreadable. He turned it slightly, angling it toward what little light remained. Letters, stamped deep enough to survive years beneath the ground. His eyes focused, reading them slowly. And behind him, the woman took a step back. This time, Ethan heard it. Not the sound of gravel. Something softer, like fabric brushing against air. "Do not," she said, her voice no longer distant, no longer gentle, but strained in a way that made the silence around them feel even heavier. "Please do not read that." Rex barked once. Sharp, immediate, as if answering her before Ethan could. And for the first time since this began, Ethan hesitated with the tag in his hand, not because he did not understand what he was holding, but because something deep inside him already knew that whatever name was etched into that piece of metal was going to change everything. Ethan held the dog tag between his fingers, the metal colder than it should have been, as if it had not just been buried in the earth, but somewhere deeper, somewhere untouched by time. The chain hung loose, swaying slightly in the evening air, catching what little light remained as the sky dimmed into a dull, fading gray. He did not look up right away. His thumb brushed across the surface once, clearing the last thin layer of dirt from the engraved letters. The grooves were deep, intentional, meant to last. Behind him, the woman's voice trembled, softer now, almost fragile. "Please," she said again, and this time there was something unmistakable in it. Not fear, not for herself, but for what came next. Rex shifted closer, his shoulder pressing lightly against Ethan's leg, a silent presence, steady and unwavering. His breathing was slow, controlled, but there was tension beneath it, a readiness that had not left him since the moment the truck stopped. Ethan exhaled quietly, then lifted the tag slightly higher, angling it toward the last sliver of light on the horizon. His eyes focused. The letters came into view, one by one, as if revealing themselves only when he was ready to see them. D-N-I-E-L. He paused. His jaw tightened just enough to be felt. Then the rest. D-O-Y-L-E. The name settled into him before the meaning did. Daniel Doyle. He did not need to turn around to know what that meant. He felt it in the silence behind him, in the way the air seemed to hold its breath, in the way Rex did not bark this time. The woman spoke his name before he could say it aloud. "Daniel," she whispered, and the sound of it was not just a word. It was memory. It was distance. It was something carried far longer than it should have been. Ethan lowered the tag slowly, his hand tightening around it without realizing. "You said you were looking for a road," he said carefully, his voice quieter now, steadier, but different, less certain. "Is this who you were looking for?" There was no answer right away. Only the sound of wind moving through the open land, brushing past dry grass, whispering through the emptiness like it knew something neither of them could fully say. Then she spoke. "I thought, if I could find the right way," she said, her voice thinner now, stretched by something unseen, "I might find him again." Ethan turned then, slowly, the dog tag still in his hand, the chain wrapped loosely around his fingers. The woman stood where she had been, but something about her had changed. Not her position, not her shape, something else. The edges of her form felt less certain, less anchored to the space around her, like she was no longer fully part of the world she stood in. Rex did not move, but his ears lowered slightly, his posture softening in a way that felt almost respectful. Not defensive, not aggressive, acknowledging. Ethan took a step forward, just one, careful, measured. "Ma'am," he said, the word carrying more weight now, more understanding than before. "How long have you been out here?" The question lingered between them, heavier than it should have been. The woman looked at him, truly looked this time, and there was no distance in her eyes anymore. Only something quiet, something tired. "I do not remember," she said. "I remember walking. I remember waiting. I remember thinking if I just kept moving, I would find where he was supposed to be." She paused, her gaze drifting down to the dog tag in Ethan's hand. "But I never did." The wind picked up again, brushing past her coat, and for the first time, it moved. Just slightly. A faint ripple along the fabric, like the world was finally beginning to touch her again. Rex let out a low sound, not a growl, not a bark, but something softer, something that carried through the silence like a thread being pulled tight. Ethan looked down at the tag again, then back at her. "Daniel Doyle," he said quietly. "Was he your son?" The question did not feel like a question. It felt like something already answered. The woman nodded, slowly this time, the motion smooth, natural, as if whatever had been holding her out of place was beginning to loosen. "He was," she said. "He always knew which way to go. Even when he was little. He never got lost." Her voice wavered slightly, just enough to show the weight beneath it. "I thought if I followed long enough, I would find him waiting." Ethan swallowed, the words settling deeper than he expected. He had seen names like this before. On lists. On markers. On folded flags handed to families who stood straighter than anyone ever should have to. He looked at Rex again, then back at her. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "the road we think we are on is not the one we are meant to finish." The woman studied him, her expression softening in a way that felt almost like relief. Not full, not complete, but close enough to feel. "Then why does it feel so real?" she asked. Ethan did not answer right away. He did not have one. Not a simple one. Not one that would fit into words that made sense here, on an empty road, with a dog who refused to move and a woman who should not have been standing there at all. Rex stepped forward then, slowly, deliberately, closing the distance by. Another foot. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply stood there, looking at her, his amber eyes steady, unwavering. And for the first time since this began, the woman took a step back. Not out of fear, out of understanding. And in that small movement, something shifted. Not in the air, not in the light. In her. As if she had just realized she was no longer searching for the road. She had already reached the place where it ended. The space between them did not feel like distance anymore. It felt like a threshold. Ethan stood there with the dog tag in his hand, the cool metal pressing into his palm as if it carried more than just a name, more than just memory, something heavier, something unfinished. The woman's step back had not been fear, and that was what unsettled him the most. It was recognition, the kind that comes when something finally aligns in a way you cannot ignore. Rex moved again, slow and deliberate, closing the last few feet that separated him from where she stood, his posture calm now, almost solemn, as if whatever urgency had driven him before had shifted into something quieter, something resolved. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply stood there, his head slightly lowered, his gaze steady, fixed on her with a kind of understanding that went beyond instinct. The woman looked down at him, and for the first time, her expression softened completely. Not into a smile, into something deeper. Something that carried the weight of years she could not remember, but still felt. "He is not afraid of me anymore," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan glanced at Rex, then back at her. "He is not trying to scare you," Ethan said. "He is trying to stop you from going the wrong way." The words left his mouth before he fully thought them through, but once they were spoken, they settled into place with a quiet certainty. The woman's eyes lifted to his, and something shifted again, something subtle but unmistakable. "Wrong way," she repeated, as if tasting the words for the first time. "I have been walking for so long. I thought any direction was better than standing still." The wind moved gently through the open land, carrying a softer chill now, less sharp, less urgent. Ethan took a small step forward, not enough to close the distance completely, but enough to show he was no longer holding himself back. Sometimes, he said carefully, standing still is the only way to see where you really are. The woman looked past him then, her gaze drifting toward the empty road stretching into the fading light, then back to the ground where Rex had uncovered the dog tag. Her eyes lingered there, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fall away. The road, the sky, the silence, all of it narrowing down to that single point in the dirt. He was supposed to come home, she said, her voice thinner now, threaded with something fragile. They told me he would. They always say that, do they not? That they will come home. Ethan felt the words settle deep, heavier than anything that had come before. He had heard them before, in different voices, in different places, always carrying the same quiet hope that refused to break even when everything else did. He did not answer right away. There was no answer that would not feel too small. Rex stepped forward again, just one step, then slowly lowered himself to the ground in front of her, his body resting on the gravel, his head lifting just enough to meet her gaze. It was not submission. It was not rest. It was something else, something closer to offering. The woman's breath caught, just slightly, as she looked down at him. Why? She asked softly. Why would he stay? Ethan watched the moment unfold, the stillness of it, the way Rex did not move, did not blink, as if he understood the weight of the question and chose not to break it. Because he knows, Ethan said quietly, that you are not supposed to keep walking. The woman's eyes filled, not with tears that fell, but with something that reflected light differently now, something that carried both sorrow and something else beneath it, something close to relief. If I stop, she said slowly, what happens then? The question lingered in the air, heavier than any before it. Ethan looked down at the dog tag in his hand, then back at her, his grip loosening just slightly. Then you do not have to search anymore, he said. You already found what you were looking for. Her gaze dropped to the tag again, and for a moment, it seemed like she might reach for it. But she did not. Her hands remained at her sides, still, as if they no longer belonged to her in the way they once did. I cannot feel it, she whispered. I know it is there, but I cannot feel it. Rex let out a soft sound then, almost like a breath, and slowly, carefully, he shifted closer, closing the final space between them until he sat directly at her feet. Not touching, just there, present, grounded. The woman's expression changed again, the tension in it easing, the uncertainty giving way to something quieter, something accepting. She looked down at him, then back at Ethan. He is showing me, is he not? She asked. Ethan nodded once. Yes, ma'am, he said. He is. The wind moved through them again, softer now, carrying less cold, less weight, as if whatever had been pressing against this moment was beginning to lift. And in that stillness, in that quiet space between what was and what came next, something unseen began to shift, not in the world around them, but in her, as if for the first time in a very long time. She was no longer trying to find the road forward, but beginning to understand she had already reached the place where she needed to stop. The world did not rush forward after that moment. It slowed. The kind of slow that settles into your bones and makes every breath feel deliberate, every second stretch just long enough for something important to happen inside it. Ethan stood with the dog tag still resting in his hand, the metal no longer feeling cold, but steady, as if it had finally found where it belonged. Rex remained seated at the woman's feet, unmoving, his presence no longer a barrier, but an anchor, something that held the moment in place so it would not drift away before it was understood. The woman looked down at him, her gaze softer now than it had been at any point before, not searching, not questioning, just seeing. He used to sit like that, she said quietly, her voice carrying a memory that felt closer now, less distant, less blurred, right at the edge of the yard, watching the road like he was waiting for something. Ethan listened without interrupting, the image forming in his mind without effort. A small house, a quiet street, a boy who knew how to wait. He said if he watched long enough, she continued, he would know when something important was coming. Her lips trembled just slightly, not from sadness, but from the weight of remembering something that had been out of reach for too long. Rex shifted, just a little, his head lifting, his eyes still fixed on her, as if he understood every word. Every piece of the story she was pulling back into the light. Ethan glanced at the dog tag again, then slowly lowered himself down, crouching near the place where Rex had uncovered it, his movements careful, unhurried, as if he understood that anything rushed might break whatever fragile clarity had settled over the moment. He placed the tag gently in the open space between them, not handing it to her, not keeping it for himself, just setting it where it could exist without being held. The woman's gaze followed the movement, her eyes resting on the tag with a quiet intensity that had nothing to do with possession and everything to do with recognition. "I remember the day he left," she said, her voice barely more than a breath now. "He stood in the doorway and told me not to worry. Said he would be back before I even had time to miss him." A faint, almost invisible smile touched her lips. He always believed that. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, not pain, not quite sorrow, but something close, something that lived in the space between the two. He had heard those words before, spoken in different voices, carried across different distances, always with the same quiet certainty that the world would keep its promises. Rex lowered his head slightly, his ears easing back just enough to soften his posture, not in submission, but in something that felt like understanding. The woman took a slow breath, her shoulders rising and falling in a way that felt more natural now, more connected to the moment she stood in. "I waited," she said. "Days. Weeks. I told myself every sound on the road was him coming back." Her gaze lifted from the tag to Ethan, and there was no confusion left in it now, no searching, only truth. And then one day, the road stopped bringing anything at all. The wind moved again, but it no longer felt cold. It passed through them gently, like something acknowledging what had been said. Ethan nodded slowly, not as a response, but as a recognition of something that did not need to be explained. "Sometimes the road does not bring them back the way we expect," he said quietly, "but it does not mean they are lost." The woman's eyes shifted back to Rex, who remained still, present, unwavering. "Then why could I not find him?" she asked. Ethan looked at the space between them, at the dog tag resting on the ground, at the way the last light of the day seemed to gather around it, not brightly, but enough to be seen. "Because you kept walking past the place he was already waiting," he said. The words settled into the silence, not heavy, not sharp, just true. The woman's breath caught, just slightly, and for a moment, it seemed like everything around them leaned in closer, listening. "Waiting," she repeated, the word softer now, as if it had finally found its meaning. Rex moved then, slowly, deliberately, lifting himself from the ground and stepping just a little closer to her, closing the space completely without touching, his presence filling it instead. The woman looked down at him, and something in her expression changed again, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to be felt. The tension that had followed her from the beginning, the quiet pull of something unresolved, began to ease, like a thread finally loosening after being pulled too tight for too long. "I think I understand now," she said, her voice steady, grounded in a way it had not been before. Ethan remained where he was, watching, not interrupting, not guiding, just present in the moment as it unfolded on its own. The woman looked once more at the dog tag, then at Rex, and finally at the empty road beyond them. But this time, she did not look down it as if searching. She looked at it as if saying goodbye. And in that quiet shift, in that single, unspoken choice, the road seemed to lose its hold on her. Completely, as if whatever had kept her walking had finally been replaced by something else. Something still, something at peace. For a long moment, nothing moved. Not the road, not the air, not even the fading light that clung to the horizon like it was reluctant to leave. It was as if the world itself had paused, waiting for something that could not be rushed. The woman stood there, her gaze no longer searching the distance, no longer chasing something just out of reach. Instead, she looked at the space in front of her, at the place where Rex stood, where the dog tag rested, where everything that mattered had quietly gathered. Ethan did not speak. He had learned, over years that did not need to be explained, that there were moments when words only made things smaller. And this was not a moment meant to be reduced. Rex remained still, his presence steady, unwavering, his amber eyes holding hers without demand, without fear, only quiet recognition. The woman took a breath, slow and measured, and for the first time, it sounded complete. Not shallow, not searching. "Oh, I kept thinking I had more time," she said softly, her voice no longer distant, no longer pulled thin by something unseen. It was here now, present, real. More time to wait, more time to walk, more time to find him the right way. Her eyes lowered to the dog tag once more, and this time, there was no hesitation in her gaze. Only acceptance. But I think I was the one who never arrived. Ethan felt the weight of those words settle deep, not heavy, but true in a way that did not need to be questioned. He shifted slightly, not stepping forward, not stepping back, just adjusting to the moment as it unfolded. Rex moved then, slowly rising from where he stood, his body no longer tense, no longer braced. He took one step closer, then another, until he stood directly in front of her, close enough that the space between them felt like it no longer existed at all. The woman looked down at him, and something in her expression softened even further, something that had been held tightly for too long finally easing. "You are not trying to stop me," she said, almost with wonder. "You are trying to show me." Rex did not move. He did not need to. The truth of it was already there. Ethan watched as the last trace of uncertainty left her face, replaced by something quieter, something deeper. Understanding. Not sudden, not forced, but earned, piece by piece, through every step she had taken to get here. The wind passed through again, but this time, it carried no chill. It moved gently, brushing past her coat, lifting the edges slightly, as if the world had finally decided to touch her again. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, just long enough to feel it, just long enough to remember what it meant to be part of something that moved forward instead of holding still. "He is not on the road, is he?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am," he said. "He is not." She opened her eyes again, and there was no fear in them, no confusion, only a quiet clarity that had not been there before. "Then I do not need to keep walking," she said. It was not a question. It was a realization. Rex lowered his head slightly, his posture easing, his presence shifting from anchor to something gentler, something that no longer needed to hold her in place because she had already chosen to stay. Ethan crouched slightly, reaching down to pick up the dog tag once more, his movements careful, respectful, as if he understood that what he held was no longer just an object, but a bridge between what had been and what was finally being let go. He looked at her, meeting her gaze one last time. "You found him," he said quietly. "Just not the way you expected." The woman nodded, slowly, her eyes lingering on the tag, then lifting to Rex again. "Thank you," she whispered, and this time, the words were not carried away by the wind. They stayed. They settled. They meant something. Rex blinked once, a slow, deliberate motion, then stepped back just slightly, giving her space that she no longer needed but was finally ready to accept. The light shifted again, not brighter, not darker, but different, as if something unseen had changed direction. The edges of her form softened, not fading, not disappearing, just becoming less defined, less bound to the place she had been standing for so long. She looked down one last time at the road, then back at Ethan, then at Rex. And for the first time since she appeared, she smiled fully. Not distant, not fragile, peaceful. "I think he knows I am here now," she said. And in that quiet certainty, in that simple truth, something invisible finally gave way. Not with sound, not with movement, but with a stillness so complete, it felt like the end of a long journey that no longer needed to continue. The moment did not end with a sudden change. There was no flash, no sound, no clear line between what was and what came next. Instead, it unfolded the way dusk settles into night, quietly, almost unnoticed, until everything is different and you realize you are no longer standing in the same world you were a moment before. Ethan watched as the space around the woman softened, not disappearing, not fading in any way that could be easily explained, but loosening, as if whatever had been holding her there was gently letting go. The road stretched behind her, empty as it had always been, but it no longer seemed like a place to travel. It felt like something left behind. Rex stood still, his posture calm, his breathing even, his gaze no longer fixed with urgency, but steady in a way that suggested his work was done. He did not step forward. He did not follow. He simply remained where he was, present, grounded, as if he understood that this was not a moment to intervene, but one to witness. The woman looked down at him one last time, her expression filled with something that had not been there before, something lighter, something unburdened. "You knew," she said softly, her voice no longer carrying the strain it once had. "From the very beginning." Rex did not respond, not with movement, not with sound, but there was something in the stillness of him that answered her more clearly than any action could have. Ethan stood a few feet away, the dog tag resting in his hand, the chain now still, no longer swaying, as if it too had settled into its place. He did not interrupt. He did not try to explain. He had seen enough to understand that whatever was happening now did not belong to him. The woman lifted her gaze slowly, looking past them, not at the road, not at the fading horizon, but somewhere else entirely. Somewhere that could not be pointed to, could not be reached by walking. Her shoulders relaxed, the last trace of tension leaving her frame in a way that felt final, complete. "I do not feel lost anymore," she said, almost with surprise, as if the absence of that feeling was something she had forgotten was possible. Ethan felt a quiet shift inside himself at those words, something settling into place, something that did not need to be understood to be accepted. Rex lowered his head slightly, his ears easing back, not in submission, but in acknowledgement, as if he too recognized the moment for what it was. The wind moved through them once more, gentle now, carrying no chill, no urgency, just motion, simple and steady. The edges of the woman's form grew softer still, not vanishing, not slipping away, but becoming less defined, as if she no longer needed to be fully seen to be fully present. She looked back at Ethan then, her eyes clear, steady, and for the first time, entirely at peace. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but certain. Not a question, not a hesitation, a truth. Ethan nodded once, the motion small, respectful, the kind given when words would only take away from what had already been said. He did not tell her she was welcome. He did not tell her it was nothing, because it was not nothing. And she knew that. Rex shifted his weight slightly, then took one small step back, creating space where there had once been tension, as if signaling that the moment no longer required holding in place. The woman looked at him again, her smile returning, not faint, not fragile, but whole in a way that felt earned. "Take care of him," she said softly, her gaze moving briefly to Ethan, then back to Rex. "He sees more than most." Ethan let out a slow breath, something in his chest easing in a way he had not noticed tightening before. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "I know." The world remained still for one more second, one more breath, one more moment that stretched just long enough to be remembered. Then, without warning and without sound, the space she occupied simply changed. Not empty, not gone, just different, like a place where something had been set down and gently lifted away, leaving behind only the faintest trace that it had ever been there at all. The road lay silent. The sky deepened into night, and Rex, who had not moved from his place, slowly turned his head toward the empty stretch ahead, his gaze lingering there, not searching, not guarding, but watching, as if making sure that whatever had needed to find its way finally had. For a long time, Ethan did not move. The road in front of him stretched out exactly the same as it had before, a quiet ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the dark, untouched, unchanged, and yet it no longer felt like the same place. Something had passed through it. Something had ended. He stood there with the dog tag resting in his palm, the metal now warm, no longer carrying the chill it once had, as if whatever weight it held had been lifted the moment it was finally seen. Rex remained beside him, still and composed, his gaze fixed on the empty space where the woman had stood, not searching, not expecting her to return, just watching with the quiet certainty of something that understands when a story has reached its final page. The wind moved gently across the open land, brushing against Ethan's jacket, stirring the loose gravel at his feet, carrying the faint scent of earth and distance, but it no longer felt heavy. It no longer carried that strange tension that had lingered in the air when he first stopped the truck. Now it felt ordinary, and somehow, that felt like the most extraordinary thing of all. Ethan let out a slow breath, one he had not realized he had been holding, and looked down at the tag again. Daniel Doyle. The name sat there, simple, permanent, a life reduced to a few stamped letters and a chain, and yet it felt fuller now than it had a few minutes ago. Not because it had changed, but because someone had finally stopped long enough to understand what it meant. He closed his hand around it gently, not gripping it, not claiming it, just holding it with the kind of care that comes from knowing you are part of something you cannot fully explain. Rex shifted beside him, his body relaxing further, the last trace of tension leaving his frame. He turned his head slightly, looking up at Ethan, and for a brief second, their eyes met. No command, no question, just a shared understanding that did not need words. Ethan gave a small nod, almost instinctive, then crouched down once more, returning to the place where Rex had uncovered the tag. The ground was still disturbed, the loose gravel pushed aside, the earth beneath darker, softer, as if it had been waiting to be opened. He placed the dog tag back carefully, not burying it completely, not hiding it again, but setting it where it could remain, where it could exist as both a marker and a memory. He brushed a thin layer of dirt over part of it, enough to settle it in place, but left the edge visible, just a corner of metal catching what little light remained, so that anyone who might pass one day would know something had once been found here. Rex watched the movement, his ears flicking once, then settling again as he stepped closer, standing quietly at Ethan's side. The night deepened around them, the last trace of color draining from the sky, replaced by a soft, endless dark that felt less like an absence and more like a kind of rest. Ethan stood slowly, brushing his hands against his jeans, then looked out across the road one last time. Nothing moved. No cars. No lights. Just the quiet stretch of land and the faint whisper of wind moving through it. He reached for the truck door, pausing for just a second before opening it, his hand resting on the handle as his gaze drifted back to the spot where everything had happened. It looked ordinary now, completely and utterly ordinary. And yet he knew, without question, that it was not. Rex stepped up into the passenger seat without being told, settling into his place with a calm that mirrored the stillness around them. Ethan climbed in after him, closing the door with a soft click that seemed louder than it should have been in the quiet. He started the engine, the low rumble filling the space again, grounding him in something familiar, something solid. For a moment, he did not move. His hands rested on the wheel, his eyes fixed ahead, but his mind lingered behind, on a woman who had been walking for longer than she remembered, on a name that had waited patiently beneath the ground, and on a dog who had known, from the very first second, that something needed to be stopped so something else could finally begin. He glanced at Rex again, the shepherd's gaze now forward, steady, calm, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. But Ethan knew better. Some things did not leave tracks. They did not make noise. They did not ask to be believed. They simply happened, quietly, in the spaces between moments, where only those willing to stop long enough could ever notice them. He shifted the truck into gear, easing back onto the empty road, the tires rolling forward with a soft crunch against the gravel before settling onto the smooth asphalt. The headlights cut through the darkness ahead, illuminating the path forward, clear, simple, ordinary. But as he drove, the thought stayed with him, steady and unshaken, something that would not fade with distance or time. That sometimes, the road is not meant to take you somewhere new. Sometimes, it is meant to bring you back to the place where something unfinished has been waiting. And sometimes, the ones who guide you there do not speak at all. They just stand their ground, refuse to move, and trust that if you are willing to stop, to listen, to see, you will find exactly what you were never meant to lose. On a quiet stretch of road, a U.S. Marine encounters an elderly woman who seems lost, but his German shepherd senses something deeper and refuses to let her walk away. What begins as a simple request for directions slowly unfolds into one of the most emotional animal stories where instinct, memory, and unseen truths collide. As the loyal dog blocks her path, digs beneath the surface, and reveals a forgotten dog tag, the Marine realizes this is not just another roadside encounter, but a moment where the past and present meet, through subtle tension, quiet dialogue, and powerful silence. This story explores how a mother searching for her son unknowingly reaches the place where her journey had already ended, guided not by words but by the unwavering presence of a German shepherd. The Marine witnesses a rare and deeply moving moment of release and understanding. This is one of those animal stories where loyalty goes beyond protection and becomes a bridge between worlds, showing how animals can sense what humans cannot. As the truth unfolds, the emotional weight builds into a quiet but powerful realization that some paths are not meant to be continued, only understood. In this cinematic narrative, the bond between a marine and his dog becomes the center of one of the most touching animal stories, where faith, memory, and love guide a lost soul toward peace. The story gently reminds us that even the smallest act of awareness can change everything, and that in the world of animal stories, sometimes it is not about saving a life, but about helping it let go. Through atmospheric storytelling, emotional pacing, and a deeply human message. This is one of those rare animal stories that stays with you long after it ends, leaving behind a quiet sense of grace and the belief that some connections never truly fade. Character 1. A 35-year-old white U.S. Marine male, weathered face, short military haircut, wearing dusty field uniform and boots, calm but alert expression, standing upright, front view, realistic lighting, cinematic detail, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration, natural human proportions. Character 2. A 6-year-old German Shepherd dog, full body visible, strong athletic build, sable black and tan coat. Alert ears upright, intelligent amber eyes, standing steady, front view, realistic fur texture, cinematic lighting, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration.